Welcome, everyone. My name is Paige, and I'm with Deschutes Public Library, and I'm joined today by two great guests, Avni Vyas and Emily Carr. These amazing poets are going to be leading us through a tarot workshop and a poetry reading. Our presenters today are Emily Carr. She is a tarot storyteller, ransom artist, divorce poet, and eco-feminist teacher. After she got an MFA in poetry from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, she took a doctorate in eco-poetics at the University of Calgary. These days, she's assistant professor of creative writing at New College of Florida. Emily's tarot romance, Name Your Bird Without a Gun, is now available from Spork. She has published essays on storytelling and the tarot in American Poetry Review and the Writer's Chronicle. Avni Vyas is a poet and co-author of Candy in Our Brains. Avni is also the essays editor for Honey Literary. Her work has been published in journals such as Meridian, Grist, The Pinch, Rigorous Mag, Juked, and others. She teaches in the writing program at New College of Florida. Avni, Emily, thank you so very much for joining us today. We are thrilled to have you. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Take us away.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you, everyone who's out there. I want to express some gratitude for my ongoing relationship with the Deschutes Public Library. I'm grateful that, in some strange ways, COVID has afforded this opportunity for me to continue this relationship and to hopefully connect Oregon and Florida folks. So to bring together some writerly communities across the country. On that note, I'm delighted to be doing a webinar. This has sort of like been my dream all year, to do a webinar, not have to have any control over the technology. So thank you, Paige, for handling that. That said, I've never done a webinar before, so it's a little bit strange that I can't see any of y'all. So I do want to thank you for being out there and encourage y'all to interact with us in the Q&A and in the chat. We'll be paying attention to that. I'm not going to pretend that I can run the workshop and monitor the chat at the same time. So Avni's going to be helping me out and interrupting me as needed. So I've already encouraged Avni to just like interrupt me whenever she feels like it's the right moment, and I encourage you to do the same. I welcome interruption in this moment. So on that note, this is my first ever interactive poetry reading and spellcasting performance, and I'm really grateful that y'all are embarking on this journey with me. When I first proposed this event to the Deschutes Public Library, this was like months and months and months ago, I knew I wanted to spend some time with y'all in the new year, but I didn't know quite how I was being called to use that time. Unfortunately, around Christmas, via a collaboration with my friend Gray, the universe provided me with the inspiration that I needed. So if you read the event description, there was no collaborative spellcasting mentioned. That's not a mistake. That's just like the poetic brain in action, I suppose. So the frame for this event, I've been thinking about this my entire career as a poet, but increasingly in the last year, because I was strangely fortunate to publish a book during COVID-19. So that meant that all of my events were virtual. As many of y'all know, I really value collapsing hierarchies between the artist and the audience, offering art as an experience, not an object to be consumed. And so there's ways that the virtual delivery, both presents constraints and challenges and also makes certain things more possible. So over the last year, I've been thinking about creativity as giving and receiving gifts of the imagination. So how these performances can operate more in the economy of gift giving, specifically Avni and I giving gifts to you, but also y'all giving gifts back to us. I know that many of y'all out there are teachers and have spent a lot of time on Zoom, and we're all struggling with this like karmic debt, right? That we just dump energy into our computer screens, and it's like, how do you get it back? And so I've been thinking about that a lot, so we can exchange energy with each other as a group. Avni and I have also been thinking together quite a bit about creativity as a catalyst for radical acts of connection in these disconnecting times. And then finally, again, when I proposed this event, and I promise you, it's a poetry reading, it's a writing workshop, just maybe not in the format that you're used to. I didn't know that magic was going to play such an essential role. So especially today, I was asking myself, well, how do I frame that? How do I explain that? How do I bring this idea of magic into more of our conventional notions of a poetry reading and a writing workshop? Of course, many of us are all too familiar, maybe bored with arguments around, does reality create language? Does language create reality? What's the relationship between language and reality, which, is complex and mysterious and also somewhat constrained in the English language as well. So I was thinking about magic in terms of enchantment and the power that language has to enchant. I just want to leave it at that. So that's sort of like as if I use the word magic, or as we are working on this spell together, I'm thinking about language and enchantment, and I'm really working out this theory together. So I'm delighted to read what y'all have to contribute to that.
Emily,
yeah.
May I interrupt you? I was thinking along similar lines, and a word that came up for me when you said enchantment, I heard the word conjure. And I don't know if any of the other listeners might also be kind of thinking about that word, but I think of the word conjure because it does have these magical connotations. However, it's a deliberate act of bringing forth a memory, bringing forth a sensation or experience. So the magical act is happening sort of self-contained within the person, within the imagination itself. Mm-hmm. So when you were saying enchantment, there's this beautiful intersection of letting language kind of build that magic around us. But I also am reminded that part of the enchantment is the source itself. It's us. It's our time and attention that we're bringing to it. And I wanted to say that as a way to invite your thinking audience as we move into the reading and sparks. So Dr. Carr is really, really flexible. If you've read the poems, you know that Dr. Carr has the imagination and the capacity to hold all of this kind of enchantment. But I also want to remind us that those of us who may not have as much practice, we're still the ones with the imagination that is kind of bringing a spark as well. So I'm excited to see how our thoughts play together.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Particularly in terms of let's enchant each other. Let's do that mutually. It also reminds me that I did rename this event. So it's now called The Monkeys on My Back Turned into a Whole Family Circus, a spell poem for spinning your own web of truth in 2021. So as you're listening, the point of the writing workshop, poetry reading, spell casting is for us each to think about and personalize our own ways of spinning our own web of truth in 2021. And what I'm really thinking here, right, is already, even last week, the world is just terrible and awful things are happening, and we're trying to stay focused and find sources of joy and wonder. And then, just shit gets thrown in our way. And not that I'm saying we shouldn't pay attention to that or ignore that, but also I think there's some real value in saying okay, but I am busy spinning my own web of truth. And I am doing that over here. And so that's sort of the frame for everything we're going to do. And I think will be helpful as you listen. So just not to be distracted from that while also engaging with everything that will and won't unfold this year, let's say. So in terms of the blueprint for the event, I'm going to read some poems from my tarot romance that correspond to this spell. It's going to be a very short poetry reading. Then the spell is Choose Your Own Adventure. I've been writing spells pretty seriously in the last 5 or 6 months, and I like to write spells collaboratively. So we will collaborate on the spell together, and I'll also talk about how you can personalize this spell. So I'm going to offer first, before we even get into the spell, my example of how I personalized it for myself. So you kind of have that to frame your listening. Then we'll go through the spell step by step with suggestions for how you can use the spell to spin your own web of truth in 2021. And we'll pause after each step to sort of like check out what's going on in chat, see if y'all have anything that you want to add, ask, suggest. Avni will interrupt me as needed. And then at the end, we will just kind of like share where we're at and how we might go out as human beings with creative viability, hopefully enhanced creative viability, like out into the world into 2021. Okay, so I, of course, have not fully introduced Avni. I'm going to turn it over to Avni to just like explain her role as my fellow jackal poet a little bit, and then give y'all a chance in chat to sort of just introduce yourselves briefly as well.
I'll take it away. Hi, I'm Avni. I think one way to understand how I am operating in this scenario is I'm like half poetry hype man. Like I love poems. I love mischief. I love tangles and knots. So all of those things coming together and the complexities of all of our thoughts in the same place at the same time can seem overwhelming, but I personally enjoy the mess and I love the chaos. So my job is to kind of splash around in the mud and muck of our thinking a little bit, and also to revel with y'all. My magical nickname that I'm going to share with y'all today, this was given to me a long time ago when I decided to become a bourbon scholar. My nickname became Nonstop, meaning much like a run-on sentence, I could keep going and going, and the thoughts would collaborate, conspire, and extend, much like a single thread that would go and go and go and came from a very long origin point. So Nonstop, Avni Nonstop, that's who I'll be today. And if you would like to introduce yourselves, please say hello in chat.
So we're encouraging y'all to introduce yourselves with your magical nicknames, and you can take some time to think about that. We wanted to invite y'all to do that because, again, it's just like a little bit strange that you're out there. We can't see you. You can't see us. We do want to connect with creativity as the catalyst. So that feels like a pretty low stakes way to connect. I only decided that we were going to do this maybe 10 minutes before the event. So don't worry. Avni actually had like a 1-minute notice. So we didn't have a lot of time to prepare that like we didn't give you or something like that. So I think mine is VS because I want people to confuse it with verses when actually it's short for Valerie Silk. All right. I'm going to read some poems. And as I read some poems, I guess I should say, for those of y'all who aren't familiar, this is from my tarot romance, Name Your Bird Without a Gun, which I published through Spork in 2020, I think June or July. It's hard to keep track of things during the pandemic. And each poem corresponds to a tarot card. So it's a narrative written in 78 short associative scenes because there are 78 tarot cards. The tarot cards don't come, for those of y'all familiar with the tarot, they don't come in the normal order of the tarot. So I'm reading in the order from my book. These are not contiguous either. So I've picked specifically the poems that correspond to the tarot cards in this spell. As you listen, I'm really thinking of this as a warm-up for the imagination. You know, the mind is a muscle. It likes to warm up. We rarely give it an opportunity to warm up. So as you listen, this is time for you to just like get in a creative headspace. So you might want to listen for sparks, motions, images, ideas, single words that you might carry with you into the spell, or that might give you some magical energy. All right. That particular green, never. the Knight of Cups. Liberty thinks she should. Look for some sign at least. Square, swift clouds move across the afternoon. Tornadoes fall down and drown themselves in the Mississippi. There is black and there is blue, shadow. This includes the air in the trees blowing out over the freeway. Joints of gospel in a pregnancy test in the dream. Pretty blooms in the drainage ditch. The ghost of her turning dark in the grass. Fate, which requires less than volition. It requires only inertia. A rescue story, The Emperor. It's the day after Labor Day. Liberty is burning letters in a carless lot. The wind going backwards, retracing her steps in the third person. Rain hunts silence, makes rivers of her bare feet. Cicada sex and birdsong blow white against her thighs. Silent lightning leaps across the sky. Thunder makes the great day-ending sound of heartbreak. She is a drowned Ophelia, you a lanky Antony. If you are going to do this, she tells herself, do not be embarrassed. Do not skip the difficult parts. Do not be embarrassed. Heaven can wait, the lovers. When you have survived the terror of the first night together, when she has held your hand while you sleep, when in the wordless, hot silence your conscience unwinds, the planet tilts. The day before yesterday goes zinc. Holy and beautiful, she says, as seen from inside surrender. You are unarranged. Absolutely I can, you think. The first time I loved, she says, was an accident. The second time it hurt like hell. The third time I meant, she says, to last it out. Not, she says, regretting how I came a fourth time to. Your fingers make boot heel half moons. You count the ribs you will carry along and the ribs you will have to leave behind. Liberty is wearing a see-through negligee. She is lighting the bathroom with candles and sprinkling potpourri and spearmint in steaming water. Flushed, on tiptoe. Watch her rounded and scooped by electrons falling, the sky opening like gills, like flowers become flesh. In retrospect, you can forgive yourself for almost everything. Apparently,
is that Frito's commentary?
Frito is not into forgiveness.
Oh, Frito, we have so much to talk about, friend.
And we
Please
will
tell
get to
Frito I say hello.
we will get to forgiveness later, so we can all have opinions about it. Messiah on parole, the Nine of Wands reversed. Oh my gosh, also this poem starts with chihuahuas. So Frito is maybe having opinions about chihuahuas. The Messiah on parole, the Nine of Wands reversed. Chihuahuas ruin the sidewalk, pee on oak leaves. Girl Scouts share secrets on the asphalt. The truth hums, the truth trembles, the truth holds. What do you want? You ought to make up your mind. Or do you believe liberty has no plot? Even this was taken from her, as all lies are. She is drinking pink champagne from a thermos with a logo that looks like a dream catcher inside the belly of a crow. She is looking for permission to arrange her limbs easily in the orchestration of salaries, weddings, and garages. This shouldn't be a problem, but it is. There is, for example, what is unforgivable and what comes after. Small mammals fighting in the sky. Tiny and expensive, dusk begins to stretch through the trees. It is as if You have stepped sideways into a dimension where desire never stops its course, where, having come to this predicament, there is only the uncertainty of all purpose. Half kilo, the Three of Swords. Which is more demanding, deception of others or self-deception? What was she thinking when she fell silent? Do you think she will forgive you? Period or question mark? If not you, then who? Our non-Euclidean futures, the Five of Swords. Liberty is eating peaches off a bath towel on the hood of a black Oldsmobile. Liberty is eating peaches off a bath towel on the hood of a black Oldsmobile. There are abandoned farm implements and chickens taking tiny steps on flexible knees. Blue shadows turning from stag at the edge of interstate. Am I alien to myself, Liberty thinks? Or only now am I myself? This other woman, this irresponsible, indecent other woman, of whom I am jealous, this woman without a destiny who differs on the surface from other women, but deep down is the same, full of secret misgivings and fits of jealousy. Like a fugitive sparrow, unable to fly or land. Is it that we aspire to forget the stories we already know, or do we learn to forget? Icarus wing mechanism aerostat, the Queen of Swords. The 4th of July begins with a terrific roar of shotguns. There are cling peaches and cigarettes, fireworks and ham, chicken eggs and a sand bucket. A sparrow sings 3 notes, issues instructions to tornadoes, rain clouds, grasshoppers. An injured earthworm drags herself down the sidewalk. Day gathers in her collarbones, her arteries open their throats. What did you hope for after death, you say? It is like, Liberty says, being in love. The desire was there all along. It is born, not made. Doctrine connects above and below, the Hierophant. What would God say? Name the parts, define each name. His choice seen as emerging from the dark side of reason like a red planet. That's all I'm reading, y'all. That's like a crazy place to end. I had made a mistake in my notes, and so I thought I was reading another poem. So I'm just going to read that one more time so it can land, because we're going to do a lot of work with the Hierophant. And then I can like absorb my own poem too. Doctrine connects above and below, the Hierophant. What would God say? Name the parts, define each name. His choice seen as emerging from the dark side of reason, like a red planet.
That's a very powerful place to end.
Yeah, I have shocked my own self.
I think Frito technically shocked us first. So maybe Frito set the stage. And now we get to be in this exciting moment where we don't quite know how the poem was going to end or how the reading was going to end. And here we are.
Here we are. So here we are with a really intense poem and the Hierophant. So just to review, the poems I read correspond to the Hierophant, the Nine of Wands, the Queen of Swords. These are the fixed ingredients for the spell we're going to discuss together, collaborate on together. And then I also read the Knight of Cups, the Three of Swords, the Five of Swords. These are flexible ingredients for the spell. And then I read the Emperor and the Lovers. And that's kind of like a frame or maybe some shadows around the spell. So, all right. I went through this spell. I worked with the 3 fixed ingredients, the 3 flexible ingredients, and this is what I came up with. I actually did this spell spontaneously when some dolphins came to visit last week, which was really exciting. So keep in mind, you'll have many opportunities to personalize this spell, so dolphins don't have to be involved, right? Because I know many of y'all are in Oregon, and that's not really possible. All right, so my spell, the 9 of Wands, is timing. And I said to myself, I'm going to cast this spell when I next see dolphins. Fortunately, I see them like multiple times a week, so this is very possible. And I told myself, when I see the dolphins, I'm going to wade out into the water and give them my perfectionism to drown in the sea. Because for me, perfectionism is my biggest obstacle, and I want the dolphins to drown it for me. All right, then the Queen of Swords, I decided, is what I want out of this spell. When I talk about the Queen of Swords later, I'm going to talk about a sorority of fierce females with a kind of like feminine, mystical swagger. In addition to my just like wanting and needing this desperately in my life, my 2021 astrology has been telling me that that's what I should be looking for. So I'm thinking about witches whose noise complements mine, who break from tradition, who uphold high standards, who are uncompromising in their love for themselves, each other, and me. So and this needs to be face-to-face. So for those of y'all in Oregon, I love you deeply, but I got to see some people and exchange some physical energy. I feel we're all at that place right now. So as the dolphins departed towards Texas or Mexico, wherever they're headed, I asked them to bring me 3 witches into my life. So I gave them my perfectionism to drown, and then I asked them to bring me witches who'll be uncompromising in their love and their standards and their resistance to tradition. The Knight of Cups then is what I have to do to manifest this spell, to make it work. So I decided that after I did this with the dolphins, then I needed to sit on my yoga mat, read the poems that correspond to the spell. And for me, this book is me at my most heartbroken, my most desperate, my most alone, my most just like lacking in basically everything you need to feel whole and nourished and happy. And yet at the time when I was writing this book, it's also the one time in my life when I had absolutely no direction whatsoever. I had no idea what was coming next. And not surprisingly, for those of us who are very ambitious and goal-oriented, that was really liberating. So it was this really like paradoxical moment where I literally had like no home, no job, no cell phone, no laptop. Like it was just like me and my cat Dirt at the Jack Kerouac house in Orlando, Florida for 3 months. And it was, the best and the worst time of my life all together. And that's when this book started. And that's what this book takes me back to. So I thought that in order for me to manifest this spell, it will be important for me to revisit that person who, like somehow got here to this moment magically, let's say. Conjured. I think conjuring is definitely in line with that. Okay, so and then so all of us will have 4 cards in this spell. So I've got the 9 of Wands, the Queen of Swords, the Knight of Cups, and then the last card where we're all kind of arriving is the Hierophant. And so for me, I thought this is how I will really tune into the energy that I've curated or cast by the spell or by doing all of these things. So for me, I decided I'm going to end the spell by laying where the surf meets the sand. So I'm going to be one of those crazy middle-aged women, just like laying and letting the surf roll over her. Frito's into this. And I'm going to listen to Dolly Parton and Chet Atkins singing Do I Ever Cross Your Mind? Ideally, I would also do this in a chainmail bikini. Pretty sure I can't afford that as a poet. So but I haven't figured out that part of the spell, but I'm going to go out looking for like the sort of like poetry affordable version of a chainmail bikini. That's my spell. So I've done it again. It was spontaneous. I happened to be at the beach last week and dolphins came to me. So I was like, all right, here we go. Chainmail bikini or not. We're just rolling with it. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about, how I arrived there and help y'all, or we'll talk through, right, how y'all can arrive at your own versions of the spell. Do you, Avni, want to add anything before I do that?
I'm thinking about the connections across the cards that I was taking notes as you were talking. So if you saw me like looking away from the screen, I promise. For those who don't know me, I know I told you that my magic nickname this time is Nonstop. I'll give you another secret magic nickname I have, which is Homework. So Nonstop and Homework sum up, unfortunately, the features of my personality that you need to know right now. So as you were talking, Emily, I was thinking about not so much the distance or the journey that you have traveled since the poems and the book were written, but by virtue of rereading and revisiting that time, that voice, there allows a transparency. And I think so much of like tree rings, right? I'm thinking of rather than like a self we shed, like a snake skin, I think of tree rings as, we expand to be able to hold all of ourselves. And I hear so much ferocity and protection, especially in the image of the chainmail bikini featuring Dolly Parton, who I can't imagine like a more compelling or just like apt Dolly is both. I think Dolly might be the three witches that you're looking for, right? Like Dolly is intensely artistic and badass, resistant to tradition, and uncompromising sort of in her own bigness. So I see that, but I also see an incredible tenderness that comes with a figure like Dolly Parton. So as you were describing all of these pieces, I kept thinking about the poet who as you were describing, kind of at this place of having, feeling you're most lost or disoriented, this very real and kind of resilient tenderness that survives despite. So I'm thinking about Dolly, your past self, yourself that holds all of this. And I'm also thinking about like, I don't know why in my head, I'm thinking about like the Little Mermaid, just bear with me. The part where King Triton's chariot is drawn by the dolphins, but in this case, like King Triton is your perfectionism. And he's like, deuces, I have a whole ocean to run, right? And like the dolphins sort of ferry him off. Anyway, I was imagining all of this into like a collage scape in my mind, and I was thinking, surely I'll be able to write this out in a way that makes sense, and I can't. It is sort of sprawled all over my notepad, but I thought I would just verbally tell you that the miasma is happening. All of these things are in the stew, and for folks who are joining us, I hope you're also thinking about not necessarily making sense of each card, each image, but really looking for those emotional resonances where you see or feel yourself, your own journey, and the parts that arrive for you in terms of what you would like for the future. So I say all of that in my kind of overly complicated nonstop homework way to connect what we're doing with the poems and sort of how they arrive first in our words, in our thoughts, and then we're going to be pulling them together because what we do with them collaboratively and individually, I think offers a lot of opportunity to the world and to ourselves.
There's so much there. I did my own homework. This is one thing we share is nonstop homework. So I just wanted to say a couple of things that I think are resonant for what we're hoping to do together, which is this idea of listening for sparks and then just like running with it, right? Being very selfish in how you listen, how you do your own homework and interact. That it's not about like figuring something out or getting something right. This is creative writing, not chemistry. We teach our students this all the time. So it's like finding the something original that sparks for you and then just like running with it, and not even like looking back or asking yourself, does that make sense? Like with what we're still talking about, just like go with your own sparks. The other thing, which I don't want to fall down this rabbit hole, but then kind of I also do, so I'm going to try to say it really briefly, is I have a lifelong I feel like the self-help industry is my nemesis, or I am the self-help industry's nemesis. And much of the work that I do is an antidote to the ways that we're taught to fix ourselves. I'm just like increasingly frustrated with this notion that who we are isn't good enough, that we have to be better. And it's like fluoride in the water, particularly in the United States. We just like drink it and absorb it. And so I'm so resistant because much of this language is like, you have to fix yourself, meaning you have to like selectively lobotomize the part of yourself that like gets things wrong or make mistakes, and then you're going to become a better, more whole person. So I really like this metaphor of the tree rings, right? And the idea is to like hold and love and celebrate all of yourselves, right? And I think also the selves that we're desperate, we're alone, we're heartbroken, broken, really messed up, those are the selves that we really need to hold and love and celebrate in order to be nourished and happy, whatever that means. So I guess I'm grateful to my own self for having written this book, so I can go back to that moment every time I do an event like this. And if you establish a regular writing practice, that too can be you. Okay, so spellcasting 101 as we move into this. Just a few things you really need to know. Anyone can cast a spell. So a spell is really about intention. And here are some things to keep in mind. So 1, intention and flexibility. You need to have intention with a spell, but it's also important that it's flexible, just like with a poem. So the spell is creating an intentional space for you to manifest whatever you need to manifest. 2, spells, like poems, like containers. Usually the container for a spell is the 4 directions or the 4 elements. I personally prefer the 4 elements. So if you think back to my spell, there was water, there was fire, there was earth, there was air. And I'm fortunate to live by the coast, so it's very easy for me to use the elements of my container. There's general types of spells. So there's spells for clarifying, spells for protection, spells for breaking bonds, spells for divining paths, spells for healing, spells for inspiration. This is a spell poem. So it's designed to help you scrub the assumptions off your windows to the world so the light can come in. So it's like when things are looking, feeling murky, that's when you want to cast this spell to help kind of like scrub those windows clean to get some light in. I'm specifically using the language of windows, not doors, and I'm not going to let myself fall down that rabbit hole, but anybody who wants to talk about that offline or another time, it's like windows for me bring together spells, poetry, and the tarot in really powerful ways. Okay, so 4, usually you need to chant something, you need to use your breath, use your words throughout a spell. So I did sort of skip that step in mine, but at a certain point, you need to actually have prepared to chant or say something over and over to yourself until you believe it. Which leads me to 5. You have to believe in it. Like a poem, the spell is nothing without your purpose. It's also very possible, just like a poem, for a spell that is thoughtlessly spun to boomerang, to hex, or to have an unintended effect. So it's really important that you only cast the spell when you really mean it and feel like energetically in tune with your spell. So this spell uses the tarot as a tool for divination. I think about the tarot cards as windows. And so if you don't know anything about the tarot, you don't need to know anything about the tarot to cast this spell or feel energized and catalyzed by what's coming. For me, I think of the tarot cards as windows. So what do you see inside? And what does that have to say about you? This is some graffiti by Harakoot, a German graffiti duo. We're going to come back to the wisdom of Harakoot throughout. Art is like a glass window. Some people barely notice it. To them, it's see-through or just reflects random things. To others, it means the world. They love it, stop and stare because they see themselves inside of it. I encourage you to bring this philosophy, this approach to everything we're going to do next. So let's do it. All right, here's the spell. It's called, again, the monkeys on my back turned into a whole family circus, a spell for spinning your own web of truth in 2021. It's an equation spell. So there's the situation plus the medicine plus a catalyst equals supreme victory, because why not, quite frankly. The three fixed ingredients are the 9 of Wands, the situation, which is taking matters into your own hands, the medicine, the Queen of Swords, accepting the challenge without letting your emotions get in the way of doing what's right for you. I am laughing at myself every time I read that, because as a poet and a Cancer, it's just like really hilarious that I would ever do anything without my emotions getting in the way. Then the catalyst is flexible. So this is where you have choice. And so the catalyst could be the Knight of Cups, self-forgiveness, the 3 of Swords, taking care of yourself and contemplating the accountability of your oppressors later, or the 5 of Swords, doing the thing that feels wrong in order to take back your power. So that then equals supreme victory, the Hierophant. In this, like poetry, spellcasting version of supreme victory is spinning the chaos, crisis, predicament into your own web of truth. So if you are having problems seeing the slides, definitely let us know. I just paused because I was trying to look in the chat, and I think everything's okay with the slide sharing.
Gray made a really astute comment. Am I the only one that sees our national politics at play with this spell? Gray, that really resonates with me. It's something that I'm unable to stop thinking about personally. And I'm thinking a lot about this moment as such a reverberate. I feel like, and Emily, I'm sorry for jumping in, but I feel like Gray's question, I don't know if you feel this way too, Gray, but I feel like a bell has been rung and I'm kind of inside of that bell and I can barely even hear my own thoughts because the ringing is so loud, right? And in that moment, I feel overwhelmed by the vibration, the noise, and this kind of unending nowness, right? But this idea of the medicine and the catalyst, Emily and I were talking about this a little bit last week, the relationship between the medicine and the catalyst is this kind of scary but powerful invitation in my body, the way that I am experiencing it. What does it mean to sit with this kind of, ringing fear, right? Like, but I'm thinking of the bell. The bell holds it. It's within the bell. We're in the bell. And I also kind of think about what it means to sustain the catalyst and the medicine at the same time. So Gray, as you're mentioning all of this, I'm thinking about the way the spell offers us comfort and direction for moving forward, especially given the kind of challenges, fear, and unknown of what comes next. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I hope that maybe focusing our intention that way outward with ourselves as the catalyst can feel or offer an opportunity for us to feel connected to one another, but also connected to a future that we can kind of work towards together with a lot of the love that we share right now in this moment.
There's so many things there, and I'm going to try to be concise and clarify my words. So on that note, I feel like this spell is really, or any spell, can help in clarifying your energy, when you're in that like inside the bell and everything is ringing kind of moment and you need to get out so you can do something. That spells can be really helpful for clarifying. I also wanted to just like contextualize that Gray and I actually did a tarot reading on Christmas Day and drew these cards and talked a little bit about how our tarot reading can become an equation. And then later I got really nerdy and obsessive about it and turned it into a spell. So all of this took place before the new year, but the reading we did just felt really powerful, and I felt really intuitively called to spend some obsessive time thinking about how that reading resonated with me or how I would share it to other people. And so I do think that it's I don't know what the right word is, prescient maybe, but now we're sharing it after the events of Wednesday, and it seems more relevant than ever. So, all right, this is the spell. We're going to walk you through the ingredients. The first card is the Hierophant. This is the goal, right? What you might be able to get out of the spell. Gray and I really did draw the Hierophant, which is the overall year card for 2021, which is one way we knew that this was a really powerful tarot reading. So the Hierophant, as the overall year card, the Hierophant sets the tone for the year. We're using the Gregorian calendar when we do this numerology. Most of us are living by the Gregorian calendar, whether we like it or not. So that's how the numerology works. And if you live by a different calendar, I highly encourage you to do your own math and come up with your own card. So the way we get a year card is Theosophic addition, which means you add the digits of a number until you get a single digit. So 2 + 0 + 2 + 1 = 5. And then the corresponding card in the major arcana is the Hierophant, which is card number 5. So the overall year card is going to indicate archetypical energies. It's going to suggest tests and lessons, qualities we might be experiencing as a culture. So on its own, the card is not making anything happen. Tarot does not predict the future. In fact, it's really bad at that. So as you think about this card, you can think about it like a yoga pose. So we discover strength and flexibility inside a yoga pose. It's about the way our bodies express the pose. Very similarly, when we think about the year card, it's about how we discover strength and flexibility inside the card, how we as individuals express that energy, how we do or don't decide to channel it, the kinds of opportunities that it presents. In this case, for learning. So this card is all about learning. I'm going to come back to that briefly just to offer y'all some context. The reason I read the Emperor and the Lovers is because 2020, that adds up to 4. That was the year of the Emperor. And I don't think you'll need me to explain how the tests and lessons we experienced as a culture resonate with, against, despite that archetype. 2018 was Justice and High Priestess. 2019 was Hangman and Empress. 2020 is Emperor. So that's a lot of really intense years. 2022 is the Lovers. So I'm thinking that, we can use this spell so we can just get through 2021 and get to some yummy Lovers energy. And that's why I read the Lovers also, just so we could be but there's a place to land that isn't this hard, intense work all of the time. Okay, so on that note, as you don't need me to really explain, the Hierophant is a hard card. It's really hard for lots of us to make space for ourselves inside of it. Conventionally, this card is misunderstood as the Pope. So the tarot has really complex, messy, undefined origins, but the tarot that we know we've received through the 19th century occultists who were white, who were men, who were capitalists, who were part of the patriarchy. So a lot of what we've received about some of the cards has kind of been blurred and muddied and misappropriated by that legacy. So this card, again, is misunderstood as the Pope, religion, dogma, rules, super patriarchal, very bossy card that brings up all kinds of internalized shoulds, all kinds of problematic hierarchical thinking, brings up our relationships to systems and structures, to religion, to the law, to what is and isn't okay for you, the kind of person you're supposed to be. Because it's a 5, all 5s are cards of work. So in this instance, the Hierophant is really about soul work. So one way that we can start to recuperate this card so we can find it to be a helpful window, right? So again, if we come back to the tarot cards as windows, it's well, how can this be a window that that can be helpful and useful and productive for us to look through. So one way is to think about soul work versus money work. Particularly in the United States, we're taught to really focus on money work and to kind of like discard the importance of soul work. So you could use this as an opportunity to think like, well, I know what my money work is. What's my soul work, and how can I put that forward this year? Or how can I use the spell to put that forward? I also, of course, because I'm a poet and a teacher of creative writing, think a lot about the Hierophant as a card of unlearning as much as a card of learning. We talk about this with creative writing students all the time, right? That you learn something in order to unlearn it, and then you just keep repeating that process. So then also, like with that idea of unlearning, undoing cultural conditioning around authorities, systems, and hierarchies. In the original Greek, the Hierophant means to make sacred. So I also think about how this card might be an invitation to making work, how you spend your time, sacred, or thinking about work and how we spend our time, and in terms of it being sacred. So for me, or how I want to offer you this card in relation to the spell, is an invitation to self-evaluate and be aware of your influence and what is influencing you. We are meant to question ourselves, not in a way that inspires doubt, but in a way that helps us to access our own truths and mysteries. We are meant to keep our minds, hearts, eyes, and ears open. So 3 things to think about: what you think you want versus what you actually need. What counts as work? So what about the work of healing? What about the work of making mistakes inside, for example, a poem or a story? What about the work of play? And then 3, what makes a good teacher? What makes a good student? What expectations do we have of wanting people to tell us how to do something, how to be someone, how to draw a blueprint for success? So I am really grateful that in like thinking obsessively about this card, I arrived here, because I love cultivating bad role models. So specifically female artists that I am not supposed to want to be like. I've spent probably 2 decades at this point, I think, cultivating like my own coven, let's say, of women who officially or technically or conventionally right, or according to capitalist patriarchal assumptions, got it wrong, and thinking about how they can guide me in spinning my own web of truth. So for me, that's Dolly Parton. So for each of these cards, I'm going to offer you the archetype in action. This is just mine, and I encourage you, to like sort of fill in, right, your own bad role model. I just read Sarah Smarsh's She Come By It Natural, which is a lovely short journalistic book in which Sarah Smarsh loves on Dolly Parton for being a feminist icon while refusing to ever claim that label, which I think is really fantastic. So Sarah Smarsh in relation to Dolly Parton says, in the context of her native class, Parton's gift to young women is not a statement, but an example. One wishes for both from a hero. But if I could only have one of the two, I'd have the latter. So as you think about, you're personalizing this spell, you might think about, for the Hierophant, like, who is someone who's an example for you, right? Or also someone who's not perfect as a hero or heroine, who you might learn from as much via their mistakes as what they actually accomplished. Okay, so attire then. So for each card, I'm going to go through attire, archetype in action, and a motto. And if you write anything down, like, take that away with you, because that's what you're going to use to personalize the spell. The attire, and I do really believe in a non-frivolous, non-ironic way that what we wear, what we put on our bodies, right, what our skin exchanges energy with, what our body is breathing through, that is magic. It has power. It's a way of being enchanted or not in the world. So for the Hierophant, I think this attire is something that demands explanation that you refuse to explain, so you can practice not explaining yourself. and going out into the world, like with that in the front of your mind. I am just not going to explain myself. Or sometimes thinking about Dolly Parton, something that gives you height and dimension. So the motto for this card is, there is something better than perfection. I think for many of us, what prevents us from spinning our own webs of truth, or writing the next great poem, story, essay, a novel, scholarly article, is this problem of perfectionism. And that is all I have to say for the Hierophant. Avni, do you want to jump in before I move to the next card?
I'm looking at my homework, and I'm thinking a little bit about a few kind of contradictory details that I find really exciting. So, and I know you and I have talked about this, especially as poets, as educators, as feminists. There's, in so many ways, a responsibility or a almost leadership burden, where I think to myself, I want to model for, say, my students or people I encounter, or, even people who don't know me. I want them to know what I'm about, who I am, based on my talents, based on my merits. But what I hear in the Hierophant, and certainly with like the Dolly Parton example, and I am, for some reason, I'm thinking of Pussy Riot. I'm thinking of Guerrilla Girls. I'm thinking of yarn bombing. I don't know if y'all are familiar with this, but it's this kind of like radical movement in knitting and crochet and fiber arts communities, where you sort of like take over a surface with, this handmade art, this fiber art, this web of your own becoming, right? And I think about all of the connections of that. I was thinking, how does it interact with this leadership projection that so many women, and myself included, have internalized, not as a sense of worth, but as a kind of necessity for the future, right? Like, I think, what is the future if I don't act the way that we need to act, so the people around me can also see that. But I really appreciate that the Hierophant kind of allows a break from that. And like learning from mistakes, or like learning from the imperfections as a way to liberate this hermetic perfectionism, which is just as isolating. And I think mistakes allow us moments of connection, or unexpected connection or surprise. I know when I make mistakes, or trip or fall down or something, I often, I want to be told the right answer. I want to know how to fix whatever I'm sad about. But the liberation of hearing from someone else how small my own problems are, because I'm part of something bigger, and there's a whole lot of future to work for. And that is so much more important than perfection, is at once compelling, but a little scary. But I feel excited to step into that energy.
I think while you're talking about that, also, cultural conditioning and the problem that we find these role models, especially in novels and stories, in literature and movies and television. Like, where do we find these women in particular who let us let go of what we've received about leadership, about our sense of worth, about perfectionism? Because, like, how are we gonna tell ourselves a different story if all we're receiving is this other kind of story about what it's like to be a leader, to be a woman, to imagine a better future, and all of these things. And so that's one reason. So I'm keeping in mind that this is a writing workshop. And when I think about writing workshops, I think that it's equally important to emphasize what you're doing off the page and what you're doing on the page, and the fact that those are not mutually exclusive, right? They're very much nourishing and feeding each other. So as I was listening to you speak, I was thinking about on the page, right? This idea of like, how could you, very concretely like look through the window of this archetype and then do something is craft a story, craft a poem, craft a novel in which there is, right, this alternative vision of learning from and loving and looking up to a role model for her mistakes, right? Not for being perfect and getting it exactly right. And that's something that I really love with Dolly Parton, or this particular book about Dolly Parton, because Sarah Schmarsh, the author, she doesn't elide the many mistakes that Dolly has made, but she's clearly loving Dolly even in an exploration of that. You know, it's not judgmental. There's still a lot of love and care there. And I just think we don't, like, if we don't have models, if we don't create models for ourselves, how are we going to learn to be some other way? Or how do we expect other women in particular to learn to be some other way? All right, next card. The Nine of Wands. Okay, so the Hierophant again is like the goal of the spell. So the spell equals the Hierophant. And yes, you will get these slides later. Paige will send them to you. I will send them to Paige, and then Paige will send them to you. Okay, so the Nine of Wands. The Nine of Wands is the, I go back, the situation. So as I see it, the Nine of Wands is where we're all at right now, where we've kind of like been forced, the situation we've been forced to be in, which is taking matters into our own hands. This card is conventionally interpreted as the card of being like almost there, but being so exhausted that you're just gonna give up. So the card, like in terms of like the window that this card is, it's saying, don't give up, even though you really, really want to. This is an atypical depiction. Usually the figure in this card looks more like this depiction of the Nine of Wands, battered, bruised, posture exhausted. So this card very much has the tone of you're in the closing stretch, you feel alone, you're feeling desperate and defensive. So the card is asking you, where are you going to get the courage, the power, the stamina to keep going, to actually finish? Some tarot readers that I admire talk about this card in relation to play. So thinking about the idea that play is an exploration without an agenda or rules, that it doesn't have a goal, and that perhaps, you know, we can actually achieve our goal by letting go of the goal or the idea of goals. So building from the Hierophant, one question I ask myself with this card is, do play and work have to be antithetical opposites? Do they have to be mutually exclusive? So how can you keep working towards that goal while reconnecting with what brings you joy? And vice versa, how can reconnecting with joy actually catalyze you to finish whatever brought you to this place of exhaustion and desperation? I also think about my Spork editor, Richard Seiken, when I think about this question of exhaustion and play. So this is from an interview in 2016, right after Trump was elected. And the interviewer asks, in our current political climate, what is something that brings you joy? Richard answers, joy is such a startling word. I guess I've been aiming low, hoping for moments of occasional relief. I feel like I am, like we all are, being strong-armed into reaction and binary thought. I'm drawn to anything that can remind me of playfulness or multiplicity. I was watching a YouTube video on film editing yesterday, a little thing, a couple minutes long, and I found myself thinking about lateral movement, concurrent meanings, texture, atmosphere, the consequence of the frame. I don't know if I could call it joy, but I remembered that I had more strategies to understand the world than I was being encouraged to use, and more agency to use them than I was allowing myself. I read that quote back in 2016, so almost 5 years ago now, and it has stuck with me, and it has become this powerful mantra. I have more strategies to understand the world than I'm being encouraged to use, and more agency to use them than I'm allowing myself. And so specifically for the Nine of Wands, I feel like, you know, as a window, this card is reminding us that joy is a way of taking matters into your own hands. So in terms of a writing or journaling prompt, I think that listing 9 sources of joy and like putting on your fridge is something that this card wants you to do. I also wanted to talk about incremental goals and magical floating boots to wrap up the 9 of Wands. So some of you might be familiar with the story of John Aldridge, the lobster fisherman in Maine, who fell off his boat in the middle of the night and miraculously survived. He wrote a book about it. I believe it's become a movie, so perhaps we're familiar with it. So basically, John's a lobster fisherman. He falls off his boat in the middle of the night, in the middle of winter, in the middle of the Atlantic, and his fellow fishermen are sleeping. So the boat drives off. He's 40 miles in the Atlantic, and he's basically like, sure, he's going to die, right? There's really like, he's not going to survive. So first thing is magical floating boots. So apparently, I'm no fisherman, so I'm very open to correction here. Apparently, the first thing a fisherman worries about when they fall off the boat is the fact that their boots are going to drown them. So the first thing they have to do is get those boots off. And John had not your typical fishing boots. Like all the other fishermen just made fun of him because he had these weird boots. So apparently he falls in the water. He's like, I got to get these boots off. And then he notices that these boots that everybody was making fun of were actually helping him to float. And his boots were saving him. I told this story to my boyfriend, Joe, and he's not sure if magical floating boots is actually accurate, but I'm rolling with it. And like, there's a moral there too. Okay, so the boots are helping him float. He's wearing magical floating boots that everybody's made fun of. And then he decides, he's like, okay, I'm just going to stay alive until dawn. I'm just going to I think that goal is achievable. So I'm just going to focus on that. And this really resonates with kind of any big project, whether that happens on or off the page, whether you're writing a book of poems, a novel, you're taking on a new leadership position, whatever. This idea of when things are too big for our minds to hold, we tend to shut down and do nothing. If we think about climate change, for example, most of us in this space believe in climate change, but do we actually act on a daily basis as if we do? Less likely because it's too big to hold inside our minds. So I think this idea of incremental goals is really powerful. So he was like, I'm just going to stay awake until dawn. He did. And then he was like, okay, I think if I got to a buoy, I would be more likely to be like seen or found because he knows now that it's morning, there's going to be search parties out. So he gets to a buoy. And then the buoy is like not as helpful as he first thought it was going to be. So he said to himself, okay, if I get to another buoy and I like spring myself between the buoys, then I'm going to live. And it was just kind of like series of incremental goals. And so I think that the 9 of Wands is also really a window on that. Like, yes, things are so big. They're so terrible. They're so awful. You think that you're not going to survive. You can't do anything. So what if you actually zoom in and look at a smaller picture and just do what you can and see where that gets you, and then plan the next step. So in terms of attire, whatever your version of magical floating boots is, get some magical floating boots. The archetype in action, I would love for each of us, for this archetype to be an animal that is not like totally everyday, but you can actually interact with. So for me, it's dolphins, of course, but I would encourage all of us to sort of like find an animal that's specific to our local environment. And then the motto is, whenever a burden turned out heavier than it seemed, I turned out to be stronger than I seemed to. So that is the situation of the burden being heavier than it seemed, but also us being stronger than we seemed. I'm going to turn it over to you, Avni.
As you were talking about the story of the magical floating boots and John Eldridge, I was thinking about implicit. The 9 of Wands looks like a challenging card because it implies hardship. But I'm thinking also about this like folk story that I remember hearing as a kid. That was this Indian folk story featuring the Mughal king Birbal, who had a large court and was known for his very witty vizier and all of these stories that followed. Anyway, the king offered 1,000 rupees, which at the time was a lot, to anyone who could stay in the water, the freezing cold water all night. And, if they could last the whole night, then, they would get all this money, right? So the story goes that this poor farmer wades up to his waist and he finds a single lit candle in a window far away. And he fixates on this one image of this very, very small light and decides that is going to be the thing that he focuses on over the course of the entire night. The story goes on. I'm not going to tell you the whole thing, but anyway, the man ends up getting his money. But the point is that when the king disbelieved that a man could survive all night in the freezing water with only the idea of a candle for warmth, not even the warmth of a flame, it seemed preposterous and impossible, and the king felt like he was a fool, right? So, of course, the king's ego cannot be the thing that it becomes the butt of the joke. It has to be the poor farmer. But the Grand Vizier, who's so clever and so charming, figures out a way to make the king the butt of the joke as always. And that's kind of like the best part of all of these stories is like, I don't think anyone meant for an anti-imperialist brown woman in 2021 to think about the story this way. But here we are. The king gets to be the butt of the joke because the perception that this kind of endurance was beyond one's means is a lack of imagination of what humans and especially determined humans can do. So the Nine of Wands feels like that kind of reminder of both at once. So there's a tiny, tiny flame way out in the distance, and it's going to be hard. So I kind of think that both of them kind of come together all at once.
I think that especially for the Nine of Wands, thinking about sources of joy and also wanting to sort of like divorce joy from this maybe sugar-coated, Disney-fied idea we might have about joy, that turning the oppressor into the butt of the joke can be a really powerful, I would argue, source of joy and strategy for taking matters into your own hands. And I feel like that was one of my major takeaways from reading the book about Dolly Parton, is all these examples. Like, she knew she was going to be the butt of the joke always. Like, every interview, even with it when it was with a woman, she walked onto the stage already knowing, right, like which joke she was the butt of. And so she deftly, graciously turned that around and turned the oppressor, the interviewer, into the butt of a joke, as something that I noticed because it is not a skill I have. And I thought to myself that like maybe I should spend more time practicing my one-liners so I have them in my back pocket and I don't feel embarrassed and ashamed, in moments like that.
I wonder if the one-liner is maybe like a Mitch Hedberg joke that gets repeated enough to like make the spell the thing that we believe. So we may in the future have to like collect our favorite Mitch Hedberg one-liners and see which one we can pull into this part.
I love that homework. I'm writing it down. Anyone else who wants to join us in that homework assignment, you're totally welcome. All right. So the Queen of Swords is the medicine. And when I'm saying medicine, I don't mean medicine that you need to take. I'm thinking about medicine in terms of a glass of water, where you drank the glass of water. Now you have the energy, the medicine of that water inside of you, and it's time to express it. So I feel like in 2021, we kind of all drank this glass of water of accepting the challenge without letting our emotions get in the way of doing what was right for us. That might be the thorough line or common thread, despite how very differently we all experienced 21, that was similar for all of us. So this is the Queen. I have a really close relationship with this Queen. She's the first tarot card I ever got in Amsterdam in May of 2010. I did not speak Dutch and the tarot reader did not speak English. So it was a very interesting tarot reading in which the imagery on the cards really had to do a lot of work and was really the catalyst for this book. So the Queen of Swords is the queen who knows sorrow, who knows truth, who knows consequence, who knows boundaries, who knows how to say no, and who doesn't explain or apologize, who just is who she is. So this is also the queen who values clear communication and emotional detachment and refuses to sugarcoat her truths. So needless to say, she's often misunderstood and considered to be a bitch. She is the queen who is most unlikely, or least likely would be a better way of phrasing that. She is the queen who is least likely to need a man, is often misunderstood as the Ice Queen or the Virgin Queen. And kind of like bottom line for the Queen of Swords is we all admire her, but we don't actually want to be her. Like, she is rad, but it's really hard to be the Queen of Swords. So finally, you don't want to fuck with the Queen of Swords. All right. When I think about attire for the Queen of Swords, I think about the chainmail evening gown. Long story short, I recently asked my mom to give me a gift subscription to this magazine called Heroine, because I thought it would be a cool, feministy, artsy magazine, not realizing that it was in fact a magazine of high fashion. So I now subscribe to a magazine of high fashion. And in this magazine, there was a French designer who had created an entire collection of chainmail evening gowns. Keeping in mind, this designer is French and he's a man. It's still interesting some of the things he has to say about his chainmail evening gown collection. I've highlighted it in red here. So it's actually, this is the person who has inspired me to recuperate the notion of the sorority and the language of sorority this year. So he talks about this idea of women coming together to be stronger together, sorority in terms of a coven of witches, or in terms of a mystic community of women who associate with each other in order to be stronger together, a kind of radical version of feminism and that way of building their lives. So he says, I wanted to create a kind of sorority showing this bond that makes women stronger together, which led him to, non-ironically, the chainmail evening gown. He explains you have the sensuality that is expressed by the clothes, and then you have the chainmail that is symbolic of the warrior. So as he sees it, it's a balancing contrast between the two, how you cut and cover a woman's body in a way that you see its strength and force, not like underlining the supposed fragility or delicacy of it. Rather, it's about creating a sharp and fast movement with the clothes, which is the woman. So it's a strength. And so this is what I think is important. And I think maybe like most of us aren't going to be able to purchase a chainmail evening gown or make a chainmail evening gown. So it's this idea of like the texture of the clothing, something that's a strength that's fluid and quickly adaptable, that's not rigid, and sort of like the power of that. All right, so probably other people already knew this, but I had to fall down an internet rabbit hole. And I quickly learned that in 2017, the chainmail evening gown replaced the naked dress and dominated red carpets. It also became a 21st birthday mega rich girl fab thanks to Paris Hilton. So there are numerous pictures online of really rich chicks wearing chainmail evening gowns for their 21st birthdays. So Lady Gaga is well known for wearing a chainmail evening gown in 2017 when she was performing on Saturday Night Live. Here's a picture of Michelle Obama wearing a chainmail evening gown. I got really excited when I saw that Margot Robbie wore a chainmail evening gown to the premiere of I, Tonya. So I decided, for me, the archetype in action is Tonya Harding. For you, you might prefer to go with like Michelle Obama, Lady Gaga. I leave that open to you. And I just encourage you, I think this is actually a really fun and fruitful rabbit hole to fall down, like, because there are so many at this point, women who've worn chainmail evening gowns since 2017. Like, what's the one that's like your vibe that sparks for you? So I actually rewatched I, Tonya yesterday. which for those of y'all in Oregon was a real trip down memory lane because I saw it at the Tin Pan Alley Theater when it first came out. So it was like a really sweet date night. Joe and I went to the movie at the Tin Pan Theater, and then we went out to dinner, and it was very different, obviously, watching it in my living room in Florida by myself. And as I rewatched, I was rewatching with this lens. So this quote is by Tonya Harding, and she says, "My movie is going to help so many people realize that it is okay to ask for help. It took me so long to be able to ask for somebody to help me." That wasn't something I thought about at all the first time I watched the movie. And so I rewatched it through that lens, and it was really heartbreaking and powerful. So for me, I'm taking Tonya Harding as the archetype because I think that in the shadow of the Queen of Swords is this inability to ask for help because she's so good at and so determined to take matters into her own hands to do it on her own. So I think also to bring this full circle for me, and I encourage you to personalize this in your own way, I am so full of emotions. I have like trained myself to be so full of my emotions that I can't imagine what it would be like to be the Queen of Swords. My window into this card is this idea of asking for help because I can identify with that. And maybe if I'm better at asking for help or better at listening to when I need to ask for help, then maybe my emotions will get less in my way, is my personal takeaway. And if I wore a chainmail evening gown, I would probably better remember that.
As you were describing the Queen of Swords, I was thinking this is a very weird like throwback to March of last year. For some reason, I kept thinking of Carol Baskin from The Tiger King. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that series, but Carol Baskin became she showed up on the pop culture scene after her depiction and I guess ongoing conflict with what's his name? The other guy. But Carol Baskin, like when you were describing the Queen of Swords as carrying sorrow, having boundaries, accepting the challenge as well as the emotion, I know that there's a perception that the Queen of Swords is cold and aloof and perhaps detached from emotion. But then when I thought about Carol Baskin, and as I'm thinking about Tonya Harding too, there is such a desire for protection, a desire to independently kind of move forward and occupy. And yeah, don't fuck with her. I mean, she hangs out with big cats all the time. So I think about Carol Baskin as like this big cat lady, not because she necessarily wants to contain them, but because she wants to understand them and be one of them. And there's something sort of communal and surprisingly warm, but also like warm from a distance when you think about the Queen of Swords figure. And if we're still talking about Carol Baskin, the place that she runs, I think, is in Tampa. And I went there in 2017 to visit. And my favorite sort of detail about that entire space was that as each guided tour moved from location to location, the people would move through a cage. And these enclosures were largely open. So that felt like a very Queen of Swords reminder. These boundaries are there, but these boundaries are for you and your protection. And rather like the ferocity that gets to exist in the world has its own timeline, has its own momentum. And if you would like to witness it, recognize that you too need a little bit of distance from it.
I was thinking as you were saying that also that, this idea of accepting the challenge without letting your emotions get in the way of doing what's right for you, that maybe the default is to think, well, then you should detach, right? You should get away from your emotions. But what you were talking about was actually getting closer to your emotions is the way to not let them get in the way. I think that's really beautiful and also like really in line with the poetic creative writing kind of thinking that like, why do we get close to our desperation, our heartbreak, aloneness, so it doesn't get in the way, so it lives in the book which is not, or in the poems or in the story or in the novel, which is not separate from us, but is also, I mean, Ada Limon talks about that the poem can carry, for example, grief. It can carry it with you. So you're not alone while you're carrying it, which I think is really beautiful and speaks to some of what you're saying. I keep meaning to come back to this because like at the very beginning, I think when we were talking about, or you were talking about the Hierophant, I was also thinking about, Audre Lorde famously saying that poetry is the most subversive art form because it's all about feelings, and change in its deepest sense comes from feelings. And so also just like giving yourself permission to invest in your feelings as a way of sparking change or constructing your own path, towards change as well. All right. Those are the fixed ingredients. So however you spin this spell, you will be working with those 3 cards. I'm going back to it right now so you can just revisit it. So 9 of Wands plus Queen of Swords. So situation plus medicine plus catalyst, that's where you get to choose your own adventure, equals the Hierophant. And so as we go, and we're going to go more quickly through the catalyst cards, as we go through those, that's where you can choose your own adventure throughout the year. So for example, at the beginning of 2021, I just know self-forgiveness is what I need and is my catalyst, but I fully expect that as the year progresses, I'm going to swap that out for one of the other cards. So the reason that this part of the spell is flexible is so you can keep coming back to the spell and it can be useful to you throughout the year as circumstances and your life changes. All right, so the next card is the Knight of Cups. So this is the first of the optional catalyst cards. And for me, this card is self-forgiveness. And I'm calling this card self-forgiveness because that is my biggest, hardest emotion. My slides are frozen. They'll catch up here in a minute. We'll get to the Knight of Cups in case you're curious. Okay, so the Knight of Cups is big emotions. And again, I've called it self-forgiveness because that is my biggest, hardest emotion. So I encourage you to sub in whatever your biggest, hardest emotion is for the Knight of Cups. This really resonates again with my book, Name Your Bird Without a Gun, because I didn't know how to forgive myself in real life for betraying my husband in the way that I did. And so I imagined my way through that in this book. And I spent 10 years doing that. So if self-forgiveness isn't your lifelong struggle or your biggest, hardest emotions, then again, replace like whatever that is for you. So again, this is a really hard card, but it's also a really great card. The Knight of Cups is a skilled tightrope walker. So is actually really capable of balancing that biggest, hardest emotion with the needs and challenges of everyday life. So the Knight of Cups, I like to think, is able to walk that biggest, hardest emotion like a tightrope rather than riding it like a roller coaster. And that's what and when I reread Name Your Bird Without a Gun, it's like getting back on my own emotional roller coaster, which now, thankfully, I can choose to get on. Not just like on it by default. So I think also with this card that if you're on that tightrope, or maybe the tightrope feels more like a roller coaster, you don't have to feel bad about it. Just thinking about like, how can you shift that energy? So the biggest, hardest emotion feels more like a tightrope than a roller coaster. So obviously attire for this card is some really awesome tightrope walking pants. So I feel like some pants that make you feel really secure, really snazzy, like when you're about to, like these are the pants you want to fall in. So you know you're going to fall. It's going to happen in 2021 throughout the rest of your life. So like, what are the really snazzy pants you want to be wearing when you fall? So that's my attire for this card. I also, of course, like all this talk of tightroping or tightrope walking tights makes me think about yoga. And as I was thinking about this card, I was thinking about poetry as emotional yoga. And, we poets, there's not a lot of compensation or conventional forms of compensation for the work that we do, and the time that you spend on the page, the time you spend with your emotions, like you're probably not going to find conventional forms of compensation for that. So where's the value? And Avni, I feel like you would agree with this, that for us, we have been doing emotional yoga for at least the last 2 decades. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing to, really be doing emotional yoga and thinking of that as work, which brings me, back to the Hierophant and that idea of soul work, and maybe bringing soul work and money work closer together or more in line. So for this card, the archetype in action is, of course, a tightrope walker. Charles Blondin, y'all might be familiar. He was the first person to cross Niagara Falls, and he did it in all kinds of insane ways, like carrying his manager on his back. Once he even carried like a portable stove and then made an omelet. Like he didn't just fry an egg, he made an omelet because it needed to be that over the top. So in the New York Times, Catherine Rundle writes, Charles Blondin had the kind of extravagant courage that I have never come across in anyone I've met in life, but which I imagine might exist. This is really interesting, but which I imagine might exist in free climbers and female presidential candidates. So my question is, for this archetype in action for you, who exemplifies extravagant emotional courage for you? And again, I just think it's fantastic that this reporter, who exemplifies extravagant emotional courage for this reporter? Tightrope walkers, free climbers, and female presidential candidates. Kind of amazing. So my answer, of course, is Dolly Parton, because I'm on this Dolly Parton love fest. And when I think about extravagant emotional courage, it does come back to this idea of one-liners and how you respond when you're the butt of the joke, when you're always already the butt of the joke. And so it might not be like the position of the butt of the joke, but just that always already, right? When you're like always already, fill in the blank. How do you negotiate that? How do you claim some agency, I suppose, in that moment? So my example is in 2014, Billboard asked Dolly Parton, as a Southern woman, how do you speak your mind and take care of business but remain likable? What kinds of problems with that question? She says, I don't let my temper use me as much as I use it. I don't do either unless I have to because I love peace and harmony, but when you step into my territory, I will call you into it. So as we wrap up this card, I was thinking about this motto, which this is the best version I could find of this graffiti. So you can't see it very well. And it's also not in English. I believe it's in French. But if you translate it and you look at it close up, it says, even though times like these make it hard to see, magic does exist. We have seen it. And so what I encourage you to do, what I've been doing, is taking magic out and filling in the blank with your biggest, hardest emotion. So even though these times make it hard to see, self-forgiveness does exist. I have seen it.
When you were talking about the biggest, hardest fear and the biggest, hardest emotion, and the tightrope, I think about the tightrope as practice or a rehearsal that has been done so many times that you're not necessarily walking the tightrope, you're feeling your weight shift and you're finding your balance. So it has less to do with anything around you, and that, beautiful see within, see without, that's the focus of the balance. And as I was trying to think about a person that might fill that role for me, I kept thinking about my partner, who is an incredibly quiet and generous person, who is wildly funny and incredibly reserved. So all of these sort of contradictory elements remind me of a moment when we were driving across the country and we stopped at the Grand Canyon, and I was so scared. I'd never seen anything that massive And I couldn't believe that my vision could actually hold, what I was seeing. So I just wept at my first, encounter with it. Matt wanted to like dive in. That was his first impulse, was like, oh my gosh, I wish I could just jump off the edge. And I had to be like, no, that's not why we're here. But later on, he decided to go off trail, and I was so terrified. He goes off trail. He walks out onto this, I don't know what you would call it. It was like a piece of rock, a rock formation jutting out over the canyon. And, some people were brave. There were no guardrails around, and some people sort of ventured out there on their own, but there are signs everywhere saying, this is a bad idea, don't do it. And sure enough, Matt, it doesn't even faze him, but he trusts his footing. He trusts himself. And I watched him. I couldn't believe this. I watched him do a headstand at the edge and look at the Grand Canyon upside down. To me, that was my biggest fear made manifest. The love of my life, upside down, staring at the Grand Canyon. It's the most beautiful and terrifying thing I could have ever imagined. I thought my body was going to like dissolve. I didn't know if anything happened to him, what would happen to me. But I think of that tightrope walker. He doesn't give a shit about what I think. He's got it. There's a balance and a rhythm that he's already attuned to in his own body. And I don't know it. I don't see it, but I'm witnessing it. So it's magic, right? It exists. I see it.
I think also that with that emphasis on practice, that maybe that's something we're also lacking when it comes to our biggest, hardest emotions, is the permission to practice them. And again, that's something that can happen on the page, in a poem, in a story. Like that's a place where you get to practice it, so you can actually step into that Queen of Swords energy where it doesn't get in the way, but also you don't have to sort of like silence it, right, or censor it. 2 cards left. So this is another optional card. Could be your catalyst, now or later. The 3 of Swords. So the 3 of Swords is taking care of yourself and contemplating the accountability of your oppressors later. So this is a card that's full of heartbreak, trauma, grief. And as I see it, the real challenge of this card is that you feel like you did something wrong to get yourself in this place. So it's not just that you're full of grief, that you're heartbroken, that you're traumatized, but you are blaming yourself for getting yourself in this position. Most 3 of Swords tarot cards do depict a heart, like that 2-dimensional kind of heart being stabbed with 3 swords. So this card, like if we think about it as a window, is a reminder that you can and will survive your own broken heart. And also the people whose hearts you've broken can and will survive. Also that your heart will be broken. You will break hearts over and over again. If you love someone, and hopefully you love many someones, then it's almost guaranteed that they will do something that will break your heart. You will do something that will break their heart at some point. So it's not about not doing that, but what do you do in that moment when you feel like you've got 3 swords stabbed in your heart, or you feel like you've put someone else in a situation in which they have 3 swords stabbed in their hearts. So this does get back to some of our conversation about, like self-help and fixing yourself, this idea that we're taught we should spend a lot of time trying to mend our broken hearts, or to help other people mend their broken heart, that a broken heart is something that needs to be mended or fixed. And that if you can't, right, if your heart remains broken, then that is your own personal failure to not mend that brokenness. So when I think about this card, I think that, it might be asking us not to feel so rushed in mending that broken heart, that there is some value in inhabiting that energy and staying with that energy, that it's okay to be broken, to feel broken, to get broken, and also to create boundaries around that brokenness, the brokenness that is and isn't yours, to say no to cultural expectations or assumptions about brokenness and also wholeness. which makes me think of a local slam poet that Avni and I have done some work with, Cedric Hamid, who once to our students said, if you don't think broken, you won't think at all. And I think we could sub out feel. If you don't feel broken, right? If you can't express your emotions or feelings when you're broken, then you're not going to be able to feel at all. So this is a card that's ultimately about prioritizing self-care, whatever that looks like for you, because this is really like your heart is broken. You need to take care of yourself right now. Like you have a permission slip not to think about the bigger picture and just to focus on your broken heart. So I'm actually thinking attire and not any of Britney Spears' songs. But I was thinking that like maybe for this card, you just get to wear something that's playfully in bad taste because it's comforting to you, because it's what your broken heart needs, like velvet leopard print leggings or tassel earrings or a distressed brocade dress, a shirt with extravagant sleeves, a hot pink scrunchie, or your best Canadian tuxedo, which I did accidentally recently. I actually wore a Canadian tuxedo somewhere without realizing that's what I wore. Okay, so that's what leads me to this picture, but we're not going to use Britney Spears or Justin Timberlake as our archetype in action because that just seems like we go all kinds of sideways. So I actually, for me, this archetype in action is a diva with a really big, confident voice who makes her heartbreak just heartbreakingly gorgeous in song. So I thought about, like, of course, Whitney Houston, Taylor Swift, Adele. I saw Adele on her recent Saturday Night Live appearance and really loved the intro that she gave, in which she really addressed the way she's the butt of everyone's joke. She knows that it's her weight that's going to be the butt of the joke always. And so she ended her monologue by saying, I brought half of myself. And just, kind of like turning that joke around. So I also think for me, when I think about Adele making that comment, and here she is in a Canadian tuxedo, they seem to be as popular as chainmail evening gowns, is if you're only going to bring half of yourself, which is the half you're going to bring? Which is the half you're going to leave behind? I think that's a really interesting and powerful question. And so the motto for this card for me is coming from Adele, and I love this. I have my insecurities, of course, but I don't hang out with anyone who points them out to me.
I'm thinking about Adele. And I'm struggling to find another counterpart, but I love I don't know, I think this card also echoes the Queen of Swords. Well, this echoes kind of what we were talking about with the Queen of Swords in some moments. But I like the softness. There's a kind of embracing of all of the challenge. If you don't think broken, you won't think at all. So this larger acceptance of our warps and dings. And I just have to say, I think Adele looks so comfortable in this image. And I would totally want to wear that outfit right now. And if the half that shows up happens to be the denim half, how lucky for us.
Maybe that's it, because we've done some really intense work. So maybe we've arrived at the point where we're just going to write our next great poem in a Canadian tuxedo together, which I really hope our next outing.
I think that's a great invocation for the rest of 2021. It's like with the spirit of a Canadian tuxedo.
For those of y'all who don't live in Florida, we live next to some very exclusive beaches, and we'll often take walks with Frito. And so, like, none of us belong in these neighborhoods already, even if we're wearing like beach walking gear. So I would kind of love the idea if like the three of us go out next time in our best Canadian tuxedos.
I'm in. I'm definitely.
All right. So the final card, which is another catalyst card, is the Five of Swords. This is another really tricky card. It's actually one of the hardest cards in the deck to think around and to wrangle your way around. And so quite honestly, when Gray and I pulled this card, we're like, seriously, can we get another one? can we get another one? And the tarot was just like, no, I'm only giving you hard cards. So we decided we really needed to think through this card. And this took me a really, really long time to figure out how to how to scrub the assumptions off the window. So this is the card of little mistakes. The past is coming back, and it's not the parts of the past that you wanted to come back. It's an opportunity to grow, but not the one you wanted. And an invitation to let go of something you didn't want to have to let go of. So like, long story short, you just like have to do or deal with something that you really don't want to have to do or deal with. When I think about this card, especially in relation to my book, I think that it's a lesson you thought you already graduated from, that the universe keeps putting in your face over and over again. So I guess it was really like 7 years when I was intensively writing this book, the universe wanted me to learn to be alone and rely on myself. And I kept wanting to scream at the universe, I feel like I learned this lesson. Can I please graduate and just learn another one? So whatever that is for you, that's this card. And I feel like 2021 will most certainly bring that up in many individual iterations for each of us. So it's a card like nobody likes this card, but we deal with it daily. So I feel like for attire, because this card is just going to drive you crazy, stir up shit that you don't want to have to deal with, I think you need like a dressing gown or a really luxurious bathrobe, or like if you're a man, a pair of sweater shorts or whatever men wear to feel really comfortable in. Something that has a luxurious texture, that feels like the sunlit leaf, the ink black night, the river winding through swaying shafts of verdant forest and golden wheat. So it's just like, it's all about what it feels like. You just want to slip inside it. What did I come up with? Oh, well, I came back to Adele. I don't know how comfortable this outfit looks, but I just love that she was like, I'm going to a party at the park. And this is what I'm wearing to the party at the park. And I was kind of, thinking if I were Adele and I was putting on this outfit, I would think to myself, this is wrong. I know this is wrong. And then I would just do it anyways, probably because it felt wrong. And I think there is like an embracing of that like sometimes you just have to do things that feel wrong. Like sometimes that's just the case. So I'm thinking very fondly of my friend, Carrie Durong, who is the friend. If I know something is a bad idea, I know I can call her and she will tell me it's a bad idea and then ask how she can help. I feel really blessed and fortunate that I have that archetype in action in my life. So I invite you to find your own Carrie Durong for this card. And then this quote is coming from Adele, which I think really speaks to the energy of the card. Be brave and fearless to know that even if you do make a wrong decision, you're making it for a good reason.
As you're describing this difficult lesson to learn, but the contrast between its difficulty and the luxury of how we get to feel it reminds me again of the blue denim that we just left behind, and Adele in the blue denim. And Adele, if I'm honest, looks just as happy in the blue denim as she does, at a party at the park. And I think about also like what permission or what maybe permission is the right word. What helps you enjoy the wrongness. And as I'm thinking about my own personal Carrie Durong in my life, I'm thinking of my best friend, Deanna, who teaches me bravery, mostly by reminding me that pain comes anyway. And that her comfort in the face of that unavoidable pain feels like sunlit silk. It feels like I know the sunshine is there. It's going to hurt, but here's the sun anyway. So I enjoy the company that this card would offer with the inevitability of those stumbles that 2020 will bring for us individually and collectively.
I think also in terms of permission, there's a tarot reader, astrologer that I love named Lulu I Love, who puts these really fantastic videos on YouTube. And, you know, often astrology is so intense. Like whenever you get your reading, just there's some huge, big, intense challenge that you're going to have to deal with, or something deeply wrong about your personality. And so recently for Cancers, Lulu I Love said, you need to put on your best outfit and go to a grocery store you never go to. And I just loved that because it was so actually like doable. And because she was telling me, you know, as like an astrologer, that I needed to do it as a Cancer, I felt like I had permission to just like do that thing and feel like something was going to happen. It was going to manifest something or put some energy in the world. I haven't done it yet, but it's on my to-do list. And I just love that, like, that is on my to-do list because I feel like, you know, you need that. And especially now, we all need that. So to wrap things up, those are all the cards. That's the entire spell. And again, you'll get these slides because I know that was a lot of very poetic, associative, constellatory thinking for y'all to listen to in a short period of time. But just to review, so this is the spell again. And so what I did with my version of the spell was I took the dolphins from the Nine of Wands. So I took the archetype in action from the Nine of Wands. From the Queen of Swords, I took away the attire, the chainmail evening gown or bikini, or however I'm going to figure that out. And I'm also just like really excited to have this. I mean, I think I'm going to manifest the chainmail bikini on the page and not in real life, but that's equally exciting. Then for the catalyst, the Knight of Cups, the self-forgiveness and the perfectionism, that was like actually the action, what I gave away to the dolphins, what I asked for from the dolphins. And then the Hierophant was, I took Dolly Parton and was going to listen to one of her songs to sort of like seal and the spell and cast it into the world. So there's a lot of, and after I wrote the spell and I thought, well, I should give y'all an example because this is a way of thinking that you're not used to. I just really spent some time, you know, just being really creative and personal about how I wanted to make it work for me. So that is our hope for y'all. We are running up against time. So I want to turn it over to you, Avni, if you have anything else you want to say, and y'all in comments, if you have anything you want to share or ask or suggest as we wrap up. So as Avni speaks, I'll be shifting focus to the comments if there's something that you want to share there.
As we're thinking about all of these different parts of the spell, one of the challenges I know that I'm thinking of with all of my homeworks and all of my notes is like considering what proportion goes where. How much situation do I need to my medicine, to my catalyst, to get to my Hierophant? And I think one of the cool parts about a spell as a thinking frame is that the proportions change as we need it. So I think as the catalyst, if you're switching between the Knight of Cups to the Five of Swords at a different point and you're returning to this frame, I think it's also okay to think about which proportions go where in terms of your intention. And as I'm looking like through my notes, I'm also really excited about all of the floating pieces. So there's something about the Nine of Wands that could translate over, you know, to the Queen of Swords, even though they don't necessarily speak in the same way, their edges blur. And those elements and those feelings, as well as the symbols that we connect to as representations of these energies also are allowed to shift. So I guess all of that to say, if this was a lot of chaos and it's a lot to digest, I hope you enjoy the recording of this. I hope you enjoy the prompts and the sparks that come out of it. But also, I hope you enjoy the frame and adapting it to however you would like to put yourself into the world in the coming year.
Also, like in terms of thinking about that, how you want to put yourself into the world, whether that is into the world or into the world on the page. I want to say like the real world in scare quotes, because I don't believe that there's a difference between the world and the page and the real world, but that's a rabbit hole we don't have time for. But you know what I mean? That this spell can be something that you take in to say, your real life, it's also something you can take into your life on the page. And I think just as you were talking about the ingredients of the spell, the containers are not discrete. That's one thing I think that tarot and spellcasting has helped me to do, is to think about the ways that like the page and the life, the writing life and the quote unquote real life, those are not discrete containers. So how can the energy on the page carry into the real life, or the energy of the real life carry onto the page? And really, for those of y'all who are writers out there, I'm thinking about that. Foremost, this idea that we often in writing workshops talk about the nuts and bolts of writing, the techniques of craft, as if the energy of the life we're living is separate from that. So this is an opportunity there's so many opportunities to think nuts and bolts techniques of craft in relation to the spell in these cards, but it's also an opportunity to think about like, how does the energy of your life, how does that catalyze, inform, influence what happens on the page or doesn't happen on the page also. And that's our presentation. So again, I want to thank Paige. I want to thank the Deschutes Public Library. I want to thank Avni, my conspirator, and I want to thank all of y'all who are out there. Thank you for your time, energy, and attention. We are endlessly grateful, and we hope that you follow up. We'll follow up with slides, and Paige can facilitate further conversation as needed.
Thank you so much, Avni and Emily. This is fantastic. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope to hear from you soon. There is a link to a survey available on this web calendar event. We'd love to hear some feedback about what you thought. Please feel free, click that link, tell us what you loved, tell us what we can do better, and tell us what you want to see coming to you next at your Deschutes Public Library. Thank you so much. Check out our YouTube page and deschuteslibrary.org for all of our other great, fun, free content. We will see you next time. Happy 2021. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.